Hi. Thanks, you guys, for coming out for Volume 4 of Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. Tonight's pretty special to me in as much as we're here to support the Taos Men's Shelter. Thank you. My own involvement in the men's shelter began sometime in the early 2000s, and it really became very close and dear when we opened our physical building, the men's shelter, in 2007, November of 2007. And I worked there. I worked at the shelter. I would go in at 6 p.m. and I would leave at 7 in the morning. And initially I did this every single day for about 4.5 months. So that we had a school group come, some third graders, and I was giving a tour of the shelter, and this little girl, she was asking me about my hours, and she said, "So you're nocturnal?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess I am." And another little girl said, "Is that why you have those rings underneath your eyes?" Anyway, it's been a labor of love, and every one of you who came out tonight is helping support it, so I want to just thank you for that. From the bottom of my heart. We're just going to get right into it. Our first reader, well, she's my best friend, and so I'm very, very, very happy to have her here tonight. She's been involved in the community of Taos for years, on an artistic level, as a grant writer, as just someone helping out in a myriad of ways, and I'm really looking forward to hearing Annapurna Alisa Seidel this evening.
Back when I was very depressed, when I could barely lift a leg or an arm, when moving my mouth to speak to you as I am speaking now was a physical impossibility, I made lists. I'd drag myself out of bed or off the chair I'd sunk into on my way to bed, trying to get my head above the drowning waves of nausea, fear, and fatigue. Or I'd collapse into a chair at the kitchen table, and with a cup of coffee, a cigarette, and my bottle of Prozac, I'd make a list of everything I had to do. People say caffeine and nicotine are ill-gotten goods, but they don't know. They are a life raft after a shipwreck. When you're depressed and addicted to something, no matter how destructive, and you still crave it, you know you are not dead. So I'd make long lists, not wash the dishes, but rather a detailed delineation of every single step needed in order for the task to be completed. Put stopper in sink. Fill sink with water. Add soap. Swish soap around. Put plates in sink. Bowls, glasses, teacups, forks and knives, spoons, soap, sponge wash, change water, rinse, stack, drip dry. This is what kept me moving. The immense satisfaction of crossing off each activity, sometimes lunging across the counter, hands dripping soapy water to draw a line through one by one as each was accomplished. Other times I would let the tension build, grow the excitement, and when the entire task was complete, I'd sink back onto the chair, panting, and with another cup of coffee and another cigarette, I would cross off the entire set, simply orgasmic. Beloveds, I want to say how much I appreciate and love all of you. I know I should say I'm sorry, but I'm really not. I'm happy, relieved, peaceful. I know that it's wrong to write that each of these pills is a prayer. Somewhere there's a flickering light by which I can see the madness of that, but that light is very dim. And so I will pray. After I wrote the note, I picked up each of the pills I'd spilled across my bed and put them back in their bottles, locked tight the child-proof caps, heard the pills' nervous rattling as I put them back in their secret place. I've engaged in this ritual more than once. I've never taken any more than my regular small dose. I've only written one note, ever. And yet, depression is a familiar face, sometimes coming in disguise, but always revealing itself soon enough, returning for tea and biscuits, and overstaying the welcome by days, weeks, sometimes months. Ran out to get coffee, and just as I pulled my Jeep into Rockstar parking at the Cup, out of the blue and just as surprising as wildflowers or hummingbirds or the big New Mexico sky, the Taos Mariachi El Tigre band, perched high on their homecoming flatbed float and dressed like royalty in their black and white and silver charo outfits, swept Paseo del Pueblo with a rush of trumpets, violins, and guitarrones. A moment of sublime falling in love with Taos all over again, of spring fever in the fall, of falling in love with life. Inside the coffee shop, a handsome father plays with his cuter-than-cute toddler, more love to fall into. And yet, these moments are held up against a dark mirror of sadness and ash, police blotters that roar violence, statistics that shout poverty inflicted, injustices justified, sex trafficking, child porn, stabbings, shootings, rapes, robberies, animals starved, babies dumped. I do have faith. I do have love. I do have power. This isn't a pity party here. So to anyone who might dare suggest that I buck up, man up, shut up, get up, lighten up, and move along down the highway of life as if this mess is just someone else's traffic accident, I'd say, right now I'm holding up two mirrors and I'm terrified by the one reflecting that all innocence has been murdered. And I want to know, what are we going to do about it? How do we fix that? 2003, when it felt like all the mortars were raining down at once, 779-0135, caller ID blocked. Back then you could do that, but maybe you saw it anyway. That was me. Lying in bed for days, following the shadows with my eyes, a thought that made me giggle. Slid off the bed and stuttered my way into my office, grabbed what I was looking for, stuttered back onto the bed. Sitting cross-legged, not exactly steady, but upright. Rifling through the pages of Taos names and numbers, looking for strangers to call, I decided that I'd leave the messages only on answering machines with women's voices. I need drama-free drama. I tried to rehearse it out loud a couple of times, and I couldn't get through the whole thing without bursting into laughter so full, so hard, that it made my eyes water, my stomach cramp, my bladder brought to my attention. The only way to do this was to do this. I straightened my back, cleared my throat, and became serious. On the very edge of bursting out in laughter again, I tapped the numbers. Someone answered. Oh, sorry, wrong number. Disappointing, but good, giving me time to compose myself a bit more. Tapped another number. Hello, you've reached Patricia. Please leave a message after the tone. Hey, Patricia, it's me. I'm so proud of you. You always try to do the right thing. I'm proud to be your friend. Hey, Carla, it's me. You looked so beautiful yesterday. You shine. Hey, Mary, it's me. You're just so awesome. Everyone admires you, especially me. Okay, talk soon. And each time, I'd manage to hang up just in time, just at the moment when I couldn't hold it back any longer. The laughter just rolled and tumbled through me. For 5 or 6 weeks, I left 6 or 7 messages every day, surely over 200 messages in all. I imagine these women in our town and the knowing that the messages really were and are meant for them, that they are right and beautiful and strong and seen. Thank you.
That's one way to deal with depression. This next author, some of you guys know that I wait tables at the Taos Inn. And one night I'm making my rounds and I'm waiting tables. And I happened to see this customer and I looked at him and I said, that guy looks just like Jack Kerouac. And I just thought that, and I'm looking at him and it looks like he's writing. And I went over to him and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm writing a book. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, what's your name? Jack? Really? So as I was telling people that Jack Mitchell was going to be reading for tonight's Misfits, they'd say, Jack Mitchell, the photographer? And I'd say, no, Jack Mitchell, the writer. As it turns out, he's also a photographer. Anyway, Jack Mitchell.
This is called Empty Set. I'm north of the Gorge Bridge on some dirt, semi-maintained roads you can supposedly take all the way to Colorado if you have the inclination. A long way back to town, and my truck skidded into a depression full of snow. I shoved the gear into reverse and give it some gas. The wheels just spin with that sound like thumbtacks raked across a giant silk scarf, the opposite of what you'd hear if any four of them had an inch of traction. Snow falls outside. In my headlights, it's like looking through a wall of washed sheets. The reality sets in. I'm stuck at night on the mesa. I open the door and step out, grab my North Face and start walking. This is one of those times, I know, the time in a man's life when he has to make a very important decision. What kind of movie am I in? Right now, looking around, snow, cold mountains, somewhere I can't see, the distinct lack of anything human, I'd say at best I'm in a snowy version of the crop dusting scene from North by Northwest. At worst, maybe something like The Revenant. Neither option is particularly cheery. You're being dramatic, I tell myself, feeling the snow crunching under my feet. Think of it as an adventure, an opportunity for growth. Then the coyote pack howls in the distance. I listen as the sound echoes back and forth. It's one I've never gotten used to. I have too much imagination, and sounds like that are not good for imaginative people alone in the dark. I heard it my first night here when I rented a place up Guyana Canyon in Valdez, and it freaked me out so much I slept with a crucifix I made out of tongue depressors. A coyote by itself, nothing too odd about it. It could just be a dog with strep throat, but a pack of them calling out to each other in that strange, high-pitched shriek sounds more like something from beyond the grave, banshees or Navajo skinwalkers. Silence once more, the hiss of blowing snow. Then the howls again, like the ghosts of little pissed-off orphan kids out for revenge. They're closer now. I start to think maybe I'm in something like that movie where Liam Neeson gets stalked by a wolf pack. I shake and I shiver and make myself start moving again, one step then another down the main road. I don't hear the coyotes again, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad. Maybe they aren't stalking me at all, or maybe they got scared off by something even worse. I picture Communion or the X-Files now. This is alien territory, after all. I mean, there's actual road signs here warning about UFO cattle mutilation on all the highways. Just a cow with a spaceship hovering above it, alien crossing signs. Clearly, it's a common occurrence. As if to punctuate my paranoid theory, the snow lights up all around me. My eyes rip skyward, looking for the flagship of my new alien masters. But there's nothing there. The light's coming from behind me. It's not a spaceship. It's headlights. It's a car headed right for me. I'm 6'2", 190. Most places I wouldn't get messed with, even on a desolate road in the middle of a winter night. But this isn't most places. This is the freaking Mesa. It's like a disconcerting yet somehow endearing mix of Sam Peckinpah, Afghanistan, and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. People live in broken down school buses out here with chimneys made out of old tires and spray painted messages on their ramshackle gates that say things like, "Yeah, just try it," or "El Chapo for president." It's a thing. I've seen these people. I've interacted with them. Hell, I go to the coffee spot almost every day. Some are great people in a bipolar kind of way. Others remind you of Charlie Manson with dreadlocks. The question is, which kind is driving the car rumbling towards me? I could get a Ram DOS aficionado or the Unabomber. It's really a toss-up. In the end, I do what any rational person would do. I lunge off the road and hide in a row of bushes. It's not a completely cowardly act. I want to eyeball the vehicle before I decide to wave it down. If he's got human skulls welded to his bumper, for instance, that's a good sign to let it pass by. As it turns out, though, it isn't anything I have control over. I hear the crunching of snow as the car's brakes kick in. It's not slowing, it's stopping. And it stops right next to where I'm pathetically bent over in the snow. But whatever fear I feel is instantly eclipsed by the vehicle itself. I just stare, shocked, at the thing in front of me, a cloud of polluted steam wafting up from its tailpipe. It's so surreal, I don't even believe it. In fact, if you had some imaginary 1 to 10 rating scale of what kind of car you were going to get in this situation, this would be all the way at the bad end of that spectrum. It's a hearse. And by hearse, I mean the kind of vehicle that carries dead bodies to the funeral home. And not one of the newer blacked-out Tahoe versions, but an old-school Herman Munster kind. It's a freaking hearse. I've gone from X-Files to straight-up Phantasm 2. I can just make out the writing on the door through the snow. De Vargas Funeral Home and Crematory, Espanola, New Mexico. There's a whine like nails on a chalkboard as the passenger window cranks down. It's pitch black inside, as you'd expect from Dracula's car. That your truck back there? When you're done pissing, get back up on the road, a voice yells at me. It's not the voice I expect. Not a Bela Lugosi kind of thing. This is more Eli Wallach with a cold. The effect is so surprising, it's disarming. I say the only thing that occurs to me. You're in a hearse. Company car, the voice answers. If I delivered packages, it'd be a big brown truck, wouldn't it? Get in or don't, tamales are getting cold. Maybe I'm more in a comedy than a horror movie, it occurs to me. A quirky Wes Anderson kind of thing. It's an encouraging thought, so I get up and move for the idling carriage of death. The guy leans close and opens the door, and I get my first glimpse of him. Tall, muscular, Hispanic dude with one of the coolest handlebar mustaches I've ever seen. I slip in and shut the door. The interior is filled with smoke that smells like burnt pineapple from one of those electronic nicotine inhaler things. The seat is old leather and cracked and pinches my butt, but I don't care. The heat is blaring and it feels really good. The guy studies me, takes another puff, then shuts the e-cig off and sticks it in his coat. He's wearing a suit jacket, I notice, a dark one, over a faded white T-shirt with a lazily drawn image of a chimpanzee swinging underneath the words, "Let's monkey around." You should have a winch going to be out here in the snow, he says, matter of fact. It's on my list, I assure him. He yanks the stick into drive, the engine groans, and we start moving, every vibration reflecting back up through the non-existent shocks and into the hardest leather seat under me. I look around. There's no back seat, of course, just a little window that lets you look into the rear where they keep I feel a scary tingle move up my spine. Is there I say, nodding behind us. A coffin, the guy finishes for me? No. Relief washes over me. Then he clarifies. Don't put them in coffins until we bury them. They're on a stretcher till the shop. He looks at me. I look at him. The guy chuckles. Ain't nothing back there. Don't use this car for work anymore. Just around if we need an extra set of wheels. Extra set of wheels for what, I wonder, but leave the question alone. I'm Jack, I say cautiously. The guy offers his hand as he drives. Hugo. I pump the hand. It's big and dry, callous, but the shake is friendly. What are you doing out here, I ask. This road can't be good on your suspension. Checking on Omar, he answers, as if that should explain it. Who's Omar? Old guy, coming up on 90. Lives by himself. I come up every month or so, see he's still around. So you bring the hearse just in case? Nah, man, that's morbid. Hugo seems mortified. It's a company car, like I said. My mom was the secretary out at the labs before he got run out of there. Chemist, I think. They stayed in touch. She died a while back, so I check on him for her. What did he do to get run out of Los Alamos? Hugo shrugs. He don't ever talk about that. Neither did my mom, except it was some kind of lab accident. People got killed. Guess it was his fault somehow. It really stuck with him, whatever it was. Don't think he ever got over it. So what's he do out here, I ask? You wouldn't understand. He's probably right. I don't understand most things, but I still feel a little twinge of bitterness. It's like all these fellas out here. Some are crazy, some aren't. Some just have vision. Some want to live irrationally. I dig that. Ain't nobody ever achieved nothing worth anything living like everybody else. It takes a second for my mind to decode the calculus-like grammar of that last sentence, but when it does, I sense something poignant. Look, you can tell me. I'm a writer. Hugo looks at me sideways. What do you write? Geeky sci-fi stuff, aliens and explosions, sometimes a giant robot. He looks at me thoughtfully. Maybe you would get it then. You know what an empty set is? In math, an empty set is basically a set of nothing. A set is like a bag, so an empty set is just an empty bag. There's a lot of philosophical debate that comes with it, existentialist stuff. Can an empty set actually exist, that kind of thing. In answer to the guy's question, though, I just say, yeah. You know the symbol? Circle with a line through it, right? Hugo nods. Once he left the labs, Omar bought that property. 10 acres of nothing. Dirt and dry weeds. Then he got a backhoe, started digging holes. Big ones, all over. If you look at it from the air, he says it looks like an empty set symbol. Giant circle with a line through it. I'm suddenly worried that I, in fact, won't get it. He dug the holes in the shape of a huge empty set? Yep, then he filled those holes up with cars. Now I'm really worried. Cars, all kinds. A bunch of motorcycles, too. Whatever junker he could get his hands on. This makes absolutely no sense to me. I guess it shows on my face. I feel like I failed. He wants it big and he wants it to last, Hugo clarifies. Even rusted, just as long as it's there. I wonder about this Omar, out in the middle of the mesa, alone, living with what? Guilt? A need for vindication? Making this monument to math and philosophy? It had to take years and tons of sweat, and the guy was 90 and still working on it. And the truth is, it'll get buried and lost out there once he's gone, never seen again. And 95% of the people in the world wouldn't get it anyway. Surprisingly, I think maybe I do. The empty set isn't nothing. It's a set with nothing inside it. Maybe he's saying there really isn't nothing. After all, you can make it right there in the desert with old cars and holes. Maybe nothing is ever absolute or final or dead. Even nothing isn't really nothing. I saw it once, Hugo says, at sunset. It hit the top of the cars and the few side mirrors that peek out of the dirt. The whole thing kind of lit up, and it was sort of beautiful. He drops me off at the blinking light, and I watch the old hearse disappear in the snow. When I make it home, I think about Omar, out there somewhere, the rusted Buick sitting in holes in the dark, their meaning lost without any light or anyone to see them. Since that night, I've driven back out on that road 4 separate times, past where I got stuck, in the direction I saw Hugo's hearse coming from. I'm looking for Omar's property, for the sunlight reflecting off the top of the rusted empty set buried in the mesa, but I have not to this day found it. I've seen no house or trailer, no indication of where it might be, or even a sign of Hugo and his old hearse. Somehow that feels right, another mystery of this place, hidden and buried. I realize things like this are the reason I moved here. Taos is a place that understands nothing isn't really nothing, that nothing is actually something very, very important, even if we have to build giant monuments in the desert to make it sink in, to convince ourselves that there are always possibilities, that no matter what may have happened, nothing is ever really gone. Thank you.
Beautiful. Our next reader is one of those Mesa-dwelling residents. And Alice Zorthian forever holds a special place in my heart because when your children are young, you feel particularly vulnerable when you take them and drop them off at school. And Alice taught my 2 youngest children at Anansi, and they would come home from school and they would rave about Alice. They loved her. She was their favorite. She's probably still their favorite. Alice Zorthian.
How I came to Taos. I first came to Taos when I was 3 years old in 1967. My family took a road trip from Southern California to here to see my Aunt Barbara, who later became Asha, and her husband at the time, Stephen Durkee, at the Llama Foundation. There are pictures of us, my mother standing demurely next to my domineering father with my brother Alan and my sister Elsa. All of us a bunch of misplaced groovy Californians amongst the true spiritual hippies. I have a vague memory of lots of hugging and circles and holding hands and squeezing. Also, playing with my 4 girl cousins, Dakota, Shanti, Savitri, and Aurora, who took me under their wings. Definitely different than the stiff cocktail parties in suburban Southern California that I was dragged to with my parents. I remember going to 5 parties in one day. My father would take his drink from one party in our car, and we would get on the freeway to go to the next party. He would sip his drink in one hand and steer with the other. My brother and sister and I in the back seat, without car seats or seatbelts, fighting about this or that. At the mid-century modern parties, I would play in the other room with the kids. Children were to be seen and not heard, while my parents had their scotch on the rocks and martinis. Conversations about the space program, art versus science with Nobel Prize-winning physicists, and Playboy playmates. This was the late 60s to early 70s in Los Angeles, a time and place that was in the celestial realm. The next time I came to Taos was when I was 19. My brother brought me here on a wild road trip from California. My boyfriend at the time, Dave, and I rode in the back of my brother's moving truck with his furniture with one air hole to breathe out of. We were told to bang on the side of the truck if we felt there was danger. Fortunately, we made it here without passing out. We landed in Pilar, where my brother Toby had a place called La Bolsa that was right next to the river. Dave and I were set to house sit for the summer. Unfortunately, we didn't have a car, so we were stuck at the house next to the river, which didn't turn out to be so bad. Dave fished for catfish, and I had a stack of books that I finished in 2 weeks instead of the allotted 2 months that we were supposed to be here. I ended up hiking and sitting on the shore of the river, waving to the rafters. One day, I snuck down to the neighbor's house with an old bridle that my brother happened to have and put it on the neighbor's horse and rode around Pilar bareback. The neighbors caught me, but invited me to continue riding their horses, which I did. Some other neighbors had quite a pot farm going, and Dave was in heaven. We were able to get a ride up to Taos twice that summer for groceries. We got to run around the plaza, and that was it. But I remember loving everyone I met. When the 2 months were up, I went back to California as I was on my way to Humboldt State in Northern California in the fall. The rugged landscape made its way into my heart, and I swore that summer I would be back someday. Fast forward 3 years. I finished college, broke up with Dave, went to Europe, and met my future fiancé in Ireland. Not necessarily in that order, but that would be a whole nother story. I moved to Philadelphia with my fiancé, who was an emergency room physician. Those gray winters in the east triggered memories of the omnipresent sun of Taos. It didn't help that my brother kept calling with offers of more house-sitting opportunities in his ever-growing real estate empire in Taos. I had to stick out the relationship I had entered into. I was in a major metropolitan area and having the time of my life. This was the 80s. We shopped at Sharper Image and were comfortable in our yuppie lifestyle. I went back to school to get my master's degree and became a teacher. The only problem with this idyllic picture was that I was in an abusive relationship. The first time it happened, I forgave him. I had witnessed violence in my home. My mom forgave my dad, so I should forgive my fiancé. The second time it happened, I spent the night in a hotel, and he came with flowers. I had no friends or family in Philly, so I was isolated from those who could help me. I endured 7 years with this man, explaining away a black eye to coworkers, fielding my family and friends' calls, telling them I was doing just fine. We finally moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma together so that he could work at an Indian health hospital there. I was secretly ecstatic because I knew that Tulsa was closer to Taos, and maybe I could take trips there. In Tulsa, once again, there were the apologies and promises. I thought a new place would revitalize our relationship. It only got worse. Then an idea started to form. I could go to Taos and see my brother, if only for a weekend. Then the plan grew. Why go for a weekend when I'm so close? Maybe for a few weeks just to get away. Then it dawned on me I could actually leave my boyfriend and go to Taos. My thought at that point was that I would go to Taos for a couple weeks and heal, as I knew about the amazing healers here, and then continue on to L.A. But one needs to live in a city to survive, right? At least that was my thinking back then. The opportunity came. He was leaving to go on a medical conference back east. These days it's called ghosting, when one person disappears from a relationship with no trace. For me, it was a matter of survival. He left on his conference, and I put a trailer hitch on my car and packed a U-Haul and was on the road in 2 days. The highway from Tulsa to Taos was full of tears. I finally arrived here September of 1993 and saw Taos Mountain once again and knew I was home. I spent the first 2 weeks here at my brother's house in bed in an Akalajashavari state. Akalajashavari is a Hindu goddess of brokenness. When one is broken down in a clump on the floor, I slowly emerged from the state and actually started going out into this wonderful community and discovering the rich mixture of misfits, malcontents, and mystics. When I read in the Taos News that one could get a free aura cleansing at the community center, I knew I had found home. I felt a comfort level as I never had anywhere else. The healers here brought me back to myself and helped me discover the patterns that broke the cycle of abuse. That was 23 years ago. I was single here for a year and dated the gamut of Taos men. There was an Indian, an artist, and an earthship builder. Finally, one day at the end of the universe, I don't know if anybody remembers that place, but I met the father of my child. He was playing the Casio tone in an experimental music band. At that point, I was a budding performance artist. It was all meant to be. We raised the child. I discovered my spiritual path of Buddhism and soaked up the inspirational art that happens here. Yes, there was a 5-year stint in LA from 1998 to 2002. We moved in order to make some money. Bad idea. It turns out in LA, all the money you make goes towards living there. We went from apartment to apartment looking for a housing opportunity that we could afford in a good school district for our child. We were making a decent middle-class living, but rents kept going up. We finally got to the point where we were living in an apartment in Glendale where Tara had one strip of sidewalk to play on. John Irving, in his book, The Hotel New Hampshire, has a character who has to keep passing the open windows in order to not commit suicide. When I was living in LA, I had to keep passing the 10 freeway entrances because the 10 freeway takes you back to Taos, and that's all I wanted to do. I worked in the LA Unified School District and would come out of my school to SWAT teams across the road. Finally, in 2002, in the same week, both my partner and I lost our jobs. There was only one thought in my mind, and that was to come back to Taos. I packed yet another U-Haul and drove onto that 10 freeway ramp for good, this time to stay. Ken stayed in LA because he was in the middle of a sketch comedy show. With or without Ken, I was going back to Taos. He did eventually come back, the lure of Taos being too great for him as well. Child rearing here was hard for me. There's a dark side to Taos that comes from the vortex here swirling around and scooping up the young people who are not fully grounded. My child got sucked into the downward spiral, hanging out in the park and ditching school. Oh, those adolescent years of phone calls at 2 a.m. What do you mean you were at the hot springs right now? This was the only time that I thought about moving from Taos. If I just put Tara in the car and drive until we find a nice place to live far away from the drug-addled teenagers, suicides off the Gorge Bridge, and friends getting shot. I started to see the appeal of gated white Christian areas, places where people think the same and there's a close insular community to keep everyone in the same mindset. Don't worry, it was only a momentary desperate thought. We stuck it out, and I'm glad we did. She developed friendships that are so close with people that think outside the box. There's a certain fortitude that it takes to grow up in Taos. Children here seem to all have a sense of equality. No one is placed above anyone else. A lot different from where I grew up, where the wealthy children were always the ones at the top of the food chain. I am glad that my child was raised here because, like most of the Taos kids, she's fully immersed in the creative process of creating art and music. Artists rule here, not stockbrokers' kids who are off to Ivy League business schools. My malcontent nature keeps me here. Whenever I briefly toy with the thought of moving somewhere else where there might be more opportunities, I know that I will not fit in. I talk to people in metropolitan areas about how they only have one job, and whatever job it is what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. How easy it seems in a way to stay with one profession and to have that as your identity. Not to struggle with the questions of am I a school teacher, yoga teacher, poet, writer, burlesque dancer, Buddhist practitioner, filmmaker, sometimes sculptress, mother, sustainable living goddess, or what? I am accepted here, though, with whatever I do, and I really appreciate it. I get offers to go to California and help family and friends there with rent-free situations. I know it will not work. I can barely go back to LA without it getting sick or breaking down when I have to go into traffic. There are the conversations. In LA, the conversations start out with what car you drive and what you do for a living. Here, the conversations start out with what sign you are or what chakra is being activated by the connection felt between people. Those luxurious World Cup mornings where the space-time continuum is suspended with conversations about the meaning of a person's artwork to one's spiritual practice and to whose auras are mixing with whose. My most recent venture has been into the world of Airbnb. I rent a room out of my house to people who come here from all over the world to try to figure out Taos. I'm amazed by the amount of people who have never heard of the Pueblo. I insist that they go, and the guests always thank me. For us to be able to live in the shadow of that special place, emanating the intensity that it does, is proof that we will be safe no matter what happens in the world. I watch the energy of this place grab my Airbnb guests in either a positive or negative way. I had a couple I took to the Hanuman temple, and they completely freaked out when they saw that the monkey in the shrine room. They hightailed, no pun intended, it out of there. I see people ripped raw by the intense power here, coming home and crying themselves to sleep. For the most part, people are blown away by this place and ask me what it takes to live here. A lot of patience, I always tell them. About a year ago, I was reminded of what a great community of healers we have. I almost lost my life by falling off a ladder. After posting on Facebook, I had magnificent shamans showing up at my door with Reiki sessions, massage, handmade creams, essential oils, crystals, and offers to pay for x-rays. I've never felt so spoiled in my life. As a result, I heal quickly. Thank you, all of you. You know who you are. So, Taos has me in its grip for now. Yes, there are times when I get frustrated with the muddy roads, the unreturned phone calls of people that I want to give money to in exchange for work. the Taos cracks in my windshield. But then all I have to do is see one of the spectacular sunsets or a double rainbow, and I'm fully humbled by the magnificence of the natural beauty. Or I have a conversation that blows my mind and am truly inspired by the depths of the people here. No matter how much I try to tell myself otherwise, I am a Taosenia in my heart and soul.
Jay Hanuman. This next reader has been at different times in my life. He's been a mentor to me. I don't know if he even knows that. But when I would tell people, I would, be speaking about this person, and they would say, "Really? He's your mentor?" But it's true. It's been the case, whether it be motorcycles or art or mostly women. He's been there to help me. Paul Pasquarella.
Now that you see me, let's see here. Now that you see me, I'm not the person in the picture in the paper today, right? That was a 5,000-year-old alien troll that Rick Romancito photographed under the Gorge Bridge. This story, my journey into a... Can you hear me okay? Do I have this right? My journey into abstraction. While this story is true, let's pretend for a moment that it is a story where anything can happen, a mystical story. This Taos story begins in Hollywood. For the past 2 years, I'd been designing titles and logos for feature films. But now, in the evenings, I would carefully tuck away my designs, tilt up my drafting table, cut a long piece of Arches paper from a roll, tape it down, and begin my process. Art supplies were spread around the floor. I had looped a droning Laurie Anderson song for music and even created a ceremonial dance from my knowledge of Tai Chi. Anything to get me out of my head and into the magic zone. On the wall in my studio, one wall in my studio was covered with these long, dark drawings. One thing that I found troubling for me was the subject matter. There were long lines of blowing tall grass or dark lines of buffalo, all shadowed in heavy rain and wind. This was confusing since I was living in the middle of Los Angeles. But you never know where the big picture is taking you. The drawings led to a stranger's invitation to a sweat lodge. The lodge was led by a Lakota elder named Black Elk, and I was introduced to a whole new group of people from all walks. In that first lodge, I silently prayed about my art dilemma, but received no immediate answers. However, a few nights later, a very odd occurrence happened. While taking a break from drawing around midnight, I moved into an open adjoining room, rolled a cigarette at my old oak table. While I was gazing at the lit area, the work area, my eyes started to shift into a different dimension. Almost like when they're crossed, but more unique than that. Nothing I had ever experienced before. The voice. The voice was gentle and seemed to come from over my left shoulder and close to my ear. The voice said that what I was drawing was the dynamics of nature. The dynamics of nature. The soft voice continued and suggested I would be wise to expand my limited knowledge of materials and techniques. Furthermore, it was very important to have everything at my fingertips so that I didn't have to break the magic zone searching around the floor for art supplies. Well, when the voice finished, I started to freak out a bit. I wondered if it was one of those acid flashbacks the media talked about, or what if this happened driving on the LA freeway? Nothing had happened. However, my artwork and the continuing practice of Lakota rituals eventually became my catalyst for leaving Los Angeles and moving to New Mexico. After a terrifying year of painting in Santa Fe, I moved up to Taos. I moved up to Taos in 1986, and with the help of a few people, I knew Felicia Ferguson and Ron Cooper. I was trying it out after being warned by those people in Santa Fe that this was the Wild West up here and they shoot people. It was sounding better all the time. One day I accidentally ran into an old friend I had great respect for, the late Jim Harrison. And when Jim told me he came here every year and thought it was a great place, it was a tipping point for me. Of course, Jim would get up and go to El Salto and meditate at the Zendo at 7 a.m., and then the rest of the time he spent drinking at the Taos Inn at the Adobe Bar. In 1990, I built a studio in Arroyo Seco. My work was figurative and nature-based, and I was having 1 or 2 shows a year. While all seemed to be going well, I wasn't convinced I was a painter. In the years that follow, I began applying paint in more unorthodox ways. I shopped for my art tools at Randall's Hardware and began stretching my canvases over wood panels so that they could take some real abuse. I distinctly recall one morning in particular, I had 3 60 by 48 panels on my painting wall. The wall itself was unique in that it was covered with patterns of wooden pegs so that I could easily move my canvases in any direction almost instantly. That morning, I began applying paint with some of my newly designed tools and techniques, and I was amazed at the lines and patterns I could create, very nature-like. I worked on all 3 panels in the initial stages of freedom. It's always free when you first start because you just throw everything around and, it's all right. And just before going to lunch, I stood back and looked at the work. No doubt due to the ease of the movement on the wall, I moved the outside panels, the outside 2, into the center so that all 3 of the 5 by 4 foot canvases were touching. Interesting. A 5 by 12 foot triptych. Something I may be known for today, but not before that morning. After lunch, I returned and I worked into the night. I became very excited by this new process before finally falling asleep. The next morning, I awoke with the birds. I thought about the painting, then jumped out of bed like a 4-year-old on Christmas morning. I trotted out into the studio, putting on a pair of jeans, and I was careful not to look at the painting until I reached the far side of the room when I turned around. Wow, what have I done? In that summer morning, the painting looked beautiful and different, almost like someone else had painted it. Someone with far more skill and imagination, but at the same time, the painting looked more like mine than any of the paintings that preceded it. Of course, it wasn't finished yet, but what was it? Fear. Fear showed up like a rat in the room. I started to realize there was honestly no place in this painting for figures of any kind. What did that mean? I wasn't an abstract painter. In my periphery, I could see the rat growing larger. Panic set in. Not only was the painting abstract, but it was 12 feet long. It was the largest painting I had ever worked on. The rat was now dancing around the studio. I grabbed a chair, thought about throwing it at the invisible rat, but sat down at my old oak table, my head in my hands. I stared down at the grain in the tabletop, and it reminded me of something. It was that night when the voice spoke to me. Not so frightening now here in Taos because almost everyone has voices talking to them. I began to remember. Certainly my knowledge of materials and techniques had grown. Quote, "Have everything at your fingertips," the voice said. I looked around my studio. The large painting wall with all the wooden pegs, the skylights and other natural lighting, music, the lights all on dimmers, even outdoors. My painting table organized on rollers, so easily moved to any location. Everything was at my fingertips. What did he say I was drawing? I stood and I moved to the center of my studio under the massive skylight. I caught a glimpse of the little rat slipping out the door. I sat down cross-legged on the wooden floor silently for a long while. Looking at the painting, I thought, yes, this is my first abstract painting. Although not finished, I know what I will call it, the dynamics of nature. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paul. We're going to go to intermission now, and here's what I would ask of everyone. We have a table set up there. In that table is a jar. Into the jar goes money. It's like that. It's for the men's shelter. Even if you're not donating, I don't care. Please just come talk to us there. Get some information about the men's shelter. Jeff Trammell is out there. Jeff Trammell, by the way, very quiet guy, very much under the radar, doesn't like a lot of recognition, but he's the one who A, funded this whole thing, and B, put together a ton of the logistical piece of this. So thank you, Jeff, and Walking Rain Productions. I'll see you guys after break. Thanks everybody again for coming. I always forget there's so many people to thank with an event like this. We talked about Jeff Trammell and Walking Rain Productions. Danielle Prepenko Rose has videotaped every single one of these events. Thank you, Danielle. She asked me this evening in particular, UNM has donated the camera that's filming our event tonight. So huge thank you to UNM. Huge thank you. Also, just the readers, everybody who's read tonight thus far and who's going to come up here. Without that, this doesn't happen. So thank you very much. And I'm not a technological person at all. So there are many people who do things like put together the flyers and just kind of keep me grounded. I'm really not an organizer. I just kind of slapped this thing together. If you see my reading list, I did it about half an hour ago on this piece of paper. That's kind of how I roll. Anyway, Taos is this funny kind of microcosm of a place where people come at you from many different levels and on many different ways. And I kept hearing about this guy, Ken. I had a really, really close friend of mine, Eric, and he'd say, man, Ken and Andrea, they're incredible. And he'd talk about them. And one day we were doing a men's retreat out at Golden Willow, and Ken showed up to do a pipe ceremony. And that was the first time I'd met him. And it was really profound and amazing. And then I had a girlfriend, and she said, we always go to Thanksgiving at Ken and Andrea's. We've got to go over there. We ended up not going, but I ended up meeting Ken and Andrea again. And then, of course, through the ski valley. So anyway, it's with great pleasure that I introduce my Irish brethren here tonight, Ken O'Neill.
Can't see a damn thing. It's probably good. 26 years ago, I came here to marry the woman I met in Peru. And I came to escape the intensely competitive atmosphere of Silicon Valley, where I was a player for many years, and I came here to paint. The first person I met here was the last guy that spoke, Paul Pasquarella, and he introduced me to all the great artists of that time who are still great artists of this time. They took me in and just put their arms around me like everybody here has had this similar experiences. They offered honest criticism about my work, and then very encouraging at all times, and they helped stash my bank account at every Sunday night poker game. Those guys are just so amazing because I want to digress a little bit. I had a situation where my daughter got hooked badly on crack cocaine, and after a number of years and some failed programs, she came out here to Taos, and in the depth of the horrors of that story. It's a very expensive process to go through those treatments, and she was doing really well, but they came one time at the poker game and said that she was going to need 3 or 4 more weeks, and there just was no more money. I left the game pretty discouraged about that. The next day, Paul called me and said, "Did Ed call you yet?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, shit, call him, you know." So he repeated the same message. And finally I called, and I found out that after the game, after I left, the owner of the therapy center had built a new house, and he loved art. And so all of these guys said, "If we give you a piece of our art of your choosing, would you keep my daughter for the rest of the program? And that worked. So in February, she had her 22nd year clean, remarried her husband, and my grandson has recently graduated from college. So here I was in this art circle, and one would think that if you go to the best school in San Francisco and one of the finest schools in the south of France for your art background, you could just come and paint. Well, it didn't work that way for me. I just had one hell of a hard time. My paintings were technically reasonably accurate, but they had no soul. So I was pretty discouraged. We'd built a house, and in the moving process, putting things back in place, I found a box, a carton. And in it I had maybe 40 or 50 journals, entries that I've kept in my travels all over the world over about a 50-year period. So I started to read them, and I began thinking, how would I paint what these journals represent? And that began a whole change in my career. So it was an epiphany moment for me. And in the course of that, my art began to take off. It wasn't that way at the first, but I kept at it, and my career just blossomed, and so did a number of other things in my life. So what I'd like to do tonight is read one of those journal entries that I wrote in 1991. And that particular one was the one that really launched me into a very kind of offbeat style. I watch in the dim light as Don Alejandro puts 2 large, coarse leaves into the enamel pot that has been on the fire, reducing the vine of the soul down to a viscous brown liquid. En 2 horas, he lisps in his bad Spanish. He is a Huachipiri shaman from the upper Amazon in the Peruvian jungle, a small man of indeterminate age, forever smiling and teaching us, Peter and me, about La Planta, the thick ropey vine that is the source of ayahuasca. Although I'm no stranger to ceremony and ritual, I was excited to have passed the test Don Alejandro put to me, and now, after 2 days of fasting on a special tea and boiled yucca, we were ready for the entry into a world of the anaconda, the spirit of the ayahuasca. There are many levels of shamans. Some are well versed in the myriad plant life, la naturaleza, which exists in a jungle. They are not required to transfer from one world to another, yet their knowledge of this plane is phenomenal. Don Alejandro was not limited to only this skill. His years of training and honing special skills allow him to move out of the world we exist in, the center world, and go to the spirit world of the higher levels to seek assistance and guidance in dealing with a particular ailment he has been asked to heal in someone. He also has access to the lower worlds, dangerous environs where things are not always what they seem. This path has often been called the axis mundi, the center of the world. Miraculous things occur on this journey. Shamans can use sound, especially drumming, deprivation situations like vision quests with no food or water for several days, or psychotropic substances that grow naturally in the jungle. He used the latter, supplemented by a series of softly sung quatrains called Icaros, which coax the spirit into helping him with his task. For the next 3 nights, we will take this journey with him. Moving into his simple hut, I make myself as comfortable as I can as he prepares his mesa, or table, bearing his sacred objects. I am offered a cup of the brew. It is very bitter and not easy to get down. I wait, listening to the soft moans of the Icaros, interrupted by sounds I have never heard before coming from out there. I feel comforted by the company inside this hut. My conscious mind no longer controls my physical body. Moving my arms is a struggle, and I am sure it is not because of the limbs' inability to move. It is more like the mind is saying, leave those things out of this for a little while. My brain takes the shape of a long corridor filled with rows of books from floor to infinity on both sides. Little by little, as if in a time-lapse photography, thoughts come in incredible detail from my past, unfolding with each passing moment. Then Don Alejandro is inside my head, asking me questions. I am answering, but no sound comes from my lips. He brings up information that he has no possible way of knowing, but he does. This continues in waves of amplification and recession for several hours. There is no way to explain it all. Another glass comes to my lips and the process is repeated. Time is gone now. I am completely encapsulated in my mind. In some prior ceremonial rituals, I have died figuratively to myself. It can be a wrenching process initially before healing comes. This was like nothing I had experienced before, and I was remembering things from my early childhood. When the ayahuasca eventually wore off, I had a chance to sleep for an hour, and then Don Alejandro would begin interpreting our inner communication. Out of La Planta's direct hold now, I was even more astounded as this man became intertwined with my thoughts as he probed, questioned, and answered anything I could imagine. The next day, I rested my body. My mind, however, was on active duty, holding on to last night's teachings. Even the entrance of a boa into the hut sometime during the night did not rattle my nerves. It slid into a corner, coiled up, as if it too wanted some of Don Alejandro's spirit power. More tea, more yucca, more time spent keeping the fire going for tonight's brew. The jungle had swallowed up the shaman. Where did he go for rest and sustenance, I wondered. When he did return, just as evening drew the shadows from their hiding places, he stressed the acceptance of the spirit of La Planta into the psyche, welcoming it to be a part of oneself. Then his admonition that voluntad, fuerza, and fe, will, strength, and faith, were essential concepts to hold on to. 3 days and nights of this ceremony finished my introduction to the vine of the soul. It was time to return to civilization. As we left the jungle clearing to return to the small village of Pilcopata, where we could wait for a truck coming from the lower jungle to return us to Cusco, Don Alejandro instructed us to turn around, face the ceremonial hut, and yell out our names. This, he explained, was to say a temporary goodbye to that part of our spirit form that would remain there until we returned to reclaim it. I did return many times over the next 2 years. This story resulted in a series of paintings for me that I titled Axis Mundi, and my career just took off. And it wasn't very long before UNM Press allowed me to do this book with my journal entries on one side and the resulting paintings on the other. So I have a lot to be thankful for, and one of them is to be able to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
It is a psychedelic landscape we live in. One thing that maybe I haven't mentioned is that I kind of handpicked a lot of our readers tonight because they're my heroes, actually, and they're people that I look up to around the community. And this next reader, I saw him present at Pecha Kucha. And when I saw his Pecha Kucha presentation, I was so blown away. I wrote him immediately the next day. I said, "You're my new hero." I said, I want you to tell your story at the next Misfits. And he agreed to. Bruce Catlin, everybody.
This light made me look fat. So I'm trying to put on some weight. What a wonderful expression of generosity all of you are showing by being here. That's pretty amazing, and honored to be with all the other writers. And I hope I don't disappoint Clint, because it's slightly different than what he heard at Pechacucha, but... And I'm really glad, I know I'm in the right place. I've heard about depression. People are wearing glasses. I have gray hair. It's really good. I'm at home. Okay. From my perspective, I spent most of my life traveling on a pencil-drawn road, sketching in dotted lines to what I'd hope would lead to freedom from pain and onwards to salvation. But when I look back at the choices made and their accompanying effects and consequences, I now see that I could have drawn a different picture, used a variety of pencils and leveraged an eraser from time to time, and perhaps even tried a bit of color and a brush. And yet, if I hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here with you today. Now, I first learned of the light that blankets the mountains and canyons of our valley through the words and stories that trot over the pages of Frank Waters' novels and through the lens of Warren Miller's ski films. Like so many deer and elk that inhabit the Sangre de Cristo Range, the New Mexico light remained elusive and intoxicating for over 40 years. But now that these mountains, 1.8 billion years old in the making, and the life and light that falls upon them are at my fingertips, I often reflect on the twisted roads I traveled to get here and just how long this journey took. My first steps were filled with anger, anxiety, depression, and anticipation, but anger always loomed large. Like a missing puzzle piece, I felt disconnected from early on, and so at a very early age, I began a long and arduous journey in search of meaning, place, and connection. Now, I was angry for as long as I can remember, a malcontent, if you will. I was told and have old black and white photos to prove it that I threw my glass baby milk bottles at anyone who came into the kitchen, well, let's dropped into the high chair. As an infant, my earliest thoughts regarding my familial situation was, I have got to get the hell out of here. The causes for my anger are too large a subject to be shared here, but safe to say when I say the words parental mental illness and abandonment, you will surely understand. When I was a bit older and TV was in its relative infancy, watching shows like Lassie was infuriating. Why the hell did Timmy in every fucking episode ask Lassie, what's wrong, girl? What are you trying to say? I mean, if that dog was so fucking smart, why didn't she just speak English like the rest of us? After knocking the old black and white television set to the floor in disgust, my desperate parents considered everything from military schools to the then unheard of adolescent pharmaceutical therapies. I told them in no uncertain terms that if I went to a military school, I'd more than likely run away, and if drugs were the answer, I'd find and do my own, thank you very much. So I did. And in my search for a place that fit and felt right, I tried many different things, which included being raked, rolfed, dipped, shocked, irrigated, over-medicated, dangerously sexed, all to no avail. So I thought the problem was that I needed to get out more, take a class or two, maybe photography or macrame, yoga, tai chi, TM, karate, fencing, water aerobics, swimming, stress management, stretching for better flexibility, living with or knowing somebody with cancer, wine and beer making, sign language, watercoloring, chocolate making, coffee roasting, French, Spanish, Italian, or Portuguese. But you see, the problem with classes is that I really don't like people. I just need them. So when I was living in New York, I decided to see if I was crazy or not and stopped by a local hospital to complete what would be one of many psych evaluations. I truly wanted help, but I was so embarrassed because, to be serious about it, after the first two evals, I started to find them so frightening that they became comical. The more serious sounding the question, the funnier I thought them to be. For example, Part 1, please answer the following to the best of your ability. 1, do you have episodes of manic behavior? Don't know what that means, but I never sleep and I drink a lot of coffee. 2, do you have addictions? Possible, haven't finished completing the online Am I an Alcoholic self-evaluation yet. 3, do you have panic attacks? Only when I ride the subway. 4, do you feel paranoid, doomed, or helpless? Well, only when I walk under a bridge, past tall buildings, through tunnels, and at tax time. 5, do you have trouble managing your anger? Fuck yes. 6, do you have anxiety, fear, and or nervousness? Yes, yes, and no, but not sure what the difference is between anxiety and nervousness. Do you have concerns around, do you have concerns around sex? Yes, I'd like much more. 8, do you have intimate relationships concerns? See the above answer. 9, are you lonely? Desperately so. 10, have you ever contemplated suicide? Tricky. Have you ever contemplated suicide? Well, not intentionally, unless you include the time I drank a fifth of scotch, took 2 Valiums, and drove in a snowstorm with the intention of telling a girlfriend that she had no right nor a valid reason to break up with me. 11, do you currently, in bold, black letters, have thoughts of harming another person? Oh my God, yes. 12, in general, how happy or adjusted were you growing up? Choose one response: completely, substantially, average, unsatisfactory, or not at all. My answer: completely unsatisfactory. Now, needless to say that I flunked the psych evals like so many math tests in middle school and turned to what always worked, and that was more of the same: run away to find nirvana. A feeling for me akin to the first drop of alcohol plunging into the stomach that warms the belly, works its way to the heart, and then to the brain. In a sober moment many years ago, a message, I don't know where it came from, flitted in my ear to go and seek the southwest of these here states to a place called New Mexico. It took 40 years to get here, where the beauty is so overwhelmingly beautiful, it does stagger me on most days. It's not perfect, but all of you already know this. Nothing is, except from the pew of the mountaintops. Atop them, when I run with bursting lungs, I see a vast valley of farmers and artists, machinists, landscapers, roofers, painters, ranchers, plumbers, and more, all who toil with hands and hearts and mostly with souls. I see and feel the histories and fables which had folded themselves into a fantastical mix, which I call fact lore. And although I see democracy in the furrows, there is no lore or anything fantastical about the gap that divides a valley of have and have-nots. Color blinds justice and cleaves equal opportunity. Fear is masked by hatred and resentment. And I see and feel the judgment that others make upon viewing me. Their internal proclamations are made in less than 15 seconds. Judgments begin as light that passes through the eyes. The brain and its companion, emotions, call forth life experiences to press pronouncements onto their subject. Their frequently nearsighted opinion is rarely accurate or in clear view and is determined by the object's shape, size, color, gender, and the clothes he or she is wearing. And even though I know I have won the gene pool lottery, being white and male, they can't see the scars of childhood abuse that sprouted low self-esteem, doubt, depression, anger, addiction, lies, theft, bankruptcy, and hopelessness. But I really just want what most of us want: to get by with as little friction as possible without being harassed, humiliated, or harmed. Money isn't everything. It can buy a larger TV, a first-class seat, and a higher place on the hill to build your mansion, but it doesn't provide peace, joy, love, and serenity. And if you do build that house high up on that hill, just remember that objects appear much smaller from afar and may not be what you really thought they were. And I have to say here, and pardon me for this, that if I hear one more time that the mountain either accepts you or tosses you out, I will fucking scream. The first time someone imparted this bit of fact lore, I replied, why would the entity that created such beautiful blue mountains give birth to one so randomly prejudiced? And if the mountain is so high, mighty, powerful, and discriminatory, then it can pay my rent, wash my clothes, and put food on that fucking table. Now, the light that brought me to this beautiful valley still remains intoxicating. Its elusiveness lies only in its ability to shift and change minute by minute. And if I pay attention long enough, I may just see what is truly trying to illuminate. It's true, this is the land of enchantment. My anger has subsided, so too has the anxiety and depression, and I no longer feel the need to run away. only the desire to run up the spine of our mountains to glimpse the pencil-drawn road that has now been replaced by a Technicolor painting. Thank you very much.
Still my hero. Our next reader has got a resume that's about literally a mile long. I mean, seriously, she's a powerhouse in every direction. But the reason that she's particularly special to me is a couple years ago, we spent a Christmas dinner together in which we were listening to the poet David White. And some short time later, yeah, if you know David White, he's incredible. Some short time later, he was speaking in Colorado Springs. And so I asked Dora, I said, do you want to go see David White in Colorado Springs? And she said, yeah, let's go. Well, this trip turned out, and I didn't know this about Dora at the time, but when you're around her, like magical things kind of happen. Yeah. And it was a very magical trip. It was filled with like a snowstorm and every like species of wildlife you could imagine, elk surrounding the truck. And what I came to find out is that she's one of the most seriously authentic people I've ever met. And in this, she's become such a friend, like the intuitive kind of friend you have that like the moment you're down, you get that phone call, you know, I haven't called in like, 6 weeks, but it's that moment. That's Dora McQuaid.
So is the white paper cup with water in it for... Yay. Oh. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be on this particular stage again. I love this stage in part because the stage lights are so fabulously bright, I can't see any of you. More importantly, it's an honor to be home in Taos briefly again, and to be able to join an event as compelling and wild and typical of Taos as this one, and even more so to be able to do that on behalf of Clint and the incredible work that he does in regard to the men's homeless shelter. Clint does not talk about his history or why he is so committed to that work or all that he has accomplished in his efforts to provide shelter for men who are homeless. And I'm not going to out you. I'm just going to tell you thank you. And thank you for honoring me with the opportunity to join you when it worked with my travel schedule finally. I want to talk for a minute about homelessness because ultimately it's why we're here. We're all here to hear these amazing stories one after another. Everybody has a crazy Taos story, right? How you got here, it's full of synchronicity, a ton of grace, something magical happens, whether the truck is surrounded by elk or you hear a voice that tells you, go and paint. We all have these astonishing stories. And what a tremendous gift in this community for all of us to come together and hear these stories of people that we know, sometimes people that we love, sometimes people that we might want to love, on behalf of supporting these nonprofits that so desperately need our support. And yet the Men's Homeless Shelter is not only a nonprofit that needs our support, it's there because the men who are served by it are in desperate need of our support. Homelessness in this country is a travesty. It's a travesty anywhere. In this country, even more so. And I'm not going to go into that. It seems pretty evident. However, there are several intersections, in fact, around homelessness and my particular story. And some of you know that I do international work addressing the issues of both domestic and sexual violence using poetry and performance and speaking as my primary mediums. And I do that work because I am a survivor of both domestic and sexual violence. One of the first intersections here tonight is that for women and children, domestic violence is the #1 cause of homelessness. 60% of the women and children who are homeless in this country are homeless because they are fleeing domestic violence that is threatening their lives. Recently, 50% of the major United States cities stated that domestic violence is the primary cause of homelessness in their cities. Cities included were Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Antonio, Seattle, Trenton, Charleston, Nashville, St. Paul, Salt Lake City, Burlington, Cedar Rapids, and the list goes on. Over 80% of the survivors entering shelters identify 2 primary needs: finding housing that I can afford is second only to finding safety for myself. I have been one of those women. I have been a homeless woman with multiple degrees, 3 teaching gigs as faculty at major universities in this country, a woman who has owned 3 businesses and has traveled the world to speak. I was homeless for 3 months, trying to get away from a former partner who held me hostage for 17 hours with a pistol grip riot shotgun in what had once been our home. And the whole time those 17 hours unfolded, he kept saying to me, "I love you, but I just don't know." The first time I came to Taos, and I drove up the canyon from Santa Fe, I was in a ranch truck with this man and 2 handguns on the truck seat between us to remind me of my place and to ensure my silence. We pulled into Taos and we stopped at Cafe Taza, and I walked into the Taos Poetry Circus in full swing. 25 poets crowded into the back courtyard sharing their poems. And I stood up and I shared a poem. And the people who stepped out of that crowd in front of this man are the same people who still hold me in my life here today. It took me 7 months to get out. It took me months longer to go through the court system, to get his guns taken away from him, and to begin to rebuild not only my life, but myself. And for 3 of those months, I was homeless and running from a man with a gun who loved me. I'm going to share a couple of poems with you tonight. I'm not going to read from the book that I am currently on tour with. I thought I would, but I'm not. I've changed my mind once again. I'm notorious for having a set list of poems and then hitting the microphone and totally changing my mind, so I've done it again. The book is called The Scorched Earth, and it is my account of coming to terms with 30 years of violence and showing up and taking the next step and believing in magic and believing in love and believing that I could be more than one more statistic of another abused woman who nearly lost her life. So instead of reading from that book, I'm going to read a couple of poems that are actually from 2 different manuscripts that I'm working on right now for 2 different books. The first one is called First Thought, January 28th, 2015. This is a new book that I'm working on. It's called The First Thoughts. First thought. Today, the daylight is 1 minute and 41 seconds longer than yesterday. Second thought. I slept alone with the light on again last night. Third thought. I am afraid to love you. From you, I cannot hide anything. Fourth thought. The fever wolf haunts me. Holy God, but that wolf. Fifth thought. And the shotgun. Even now, when so many years have passed, that shotgun haunts me too. Fifth thought. You said, tell me the story behind you having to tell me to not ever cover your mouth again. You said it twice. Tell me. Sixth thought. My friend bought me pale orange roses, the color of kindergarten creamsicles, on the glass-topped table in a globed vase. They have been unfolding themselves all afternoon. Seventh thought. The cornhusk doll, made in late fall and placed on the sideboard below the west window, her arms flung open. You picked her up only days ago in the settle-down light of dusk. I watched you hold her in the expanse of your hand so gently, her arms flung open toward you. Harkins. I need a compass. I need breadcrumbs in the dark. I need red slippers and lipstick, both in shades of ruby. I need a passport. I need an anchor. I need unclipped wings and eagle oil on my shoulder blades and the memory of the air between Jupiter and the sun. I need the inside center of the color orange to be a little less intense. I need your voice to be 1 inch closer to my ear. I need a place to rest my hands and a caramel and perhaps a tiny pale tattoo that says, open with care. And I'm not going to read the poem about the mountain pushing people off. Oh my God. Make it up. So I came to Taos with a man with some guns, and then I ran for a long time. And I was in Chicago for the National Poetry Slam Finals with a dear friend of mine. Many of you know him because he has been in and about Taos for many years. And he walked me into a AT&T cell phone store and said, let's get new phone numbers, because my former partner had called 17 times in the previous hour. And we walked back out to Michigan Avenue, and he said to me, go back and fight. Because if you do not go back and fight for yourself, you will run forever. and he was right. And I went back and I fought, and I wrote this book, and I self-published it because there was no publisher in 1999 that was going to print a book that tells the story of 30 years of violence and what might come after it. And I went back to teaching at Penn State, and I kept coming back to Taos every summer. And it got harder every time to go back to Pennsylvania or New York or Philadelphia. And I wrote this poem in an apartment in New York. And it's amazing sometimes how our prayers are answered. Begging Bowl. I stood beneath the Rose of Sharon window in the church on 2nd and 14th after twilight services, and the sky was darkening beyond the stained glass, but those panes were lit up, eerie glow. I lit candles for the people I loved and for myself, praying to be led out into vastness, to hear only one voice that might speak truth. Strip it away, burn it clean, shake me down like a Saturday night boot, heel, spin, nothing but you. Nothing, nothing but you. I prayed. And then walked out into the village for the weekends unraveling and people waiting in an apartment 2 blocks away from me to come back quiet-eyed into their warmth. The prayers got me here. Years removed from the breath of them over those candles, I now live in a land of such vastness that my brain cannot comprehend it, even as the whole of me lifts into it beneath a sky where angels hover and dust devils are spirits traveling. I listen. There is silence and you. Each evening I am full. Each morning I wake open and empty to pin my spirit back into this coil of light. I have no idea where I am on timing. Once again. All right. So I moved here. I left Penn State, finally. Hallelujah. In 2006. And I came to Taos then for good after 7 or 8 years of the back and forth and back and forth. And I came on a 6-month poet in residence position at the Harwood Museum of Art. And in the first 8 months that I was here, I had a number of people in my life die. And they were people who had been my foundation, including my father, whose love had saved me as a little girl. And after his death, I couldn't write. It was months without writing, and I am a woman who writes every single day. I've been writing every day for 23 years. The only way I could begin to write again was in the voices of horses, because horses had been my father's animal. This is one of the horse poems. One horse. Here, beneath this mountain, I rest. I am alone in this field, her to the north of me, searching scrub for anything that might sustain me through the heat of this day, day after day. I feel myself alone, although there is the raven, the crow, the red-tailed hawk who hunts mornings here just beyond me, eyeing me in her arc. At dawn, that mountain spears a sky of welted red. By noon, she glimmers beneath the blue that holds me here. In the heat, all that I carry within my bones and hair surfaces. There is the dust, dried grasses, foxtail, this thinnest memory of rain. the heat and the blue hold me. The mountain looks on. In late afternoon, when the clouds roll and build their staircases above me, the pool of shadows at the mountain's base whisper across the crippling haze to me. Forgiveness. Forgiveness. Until they are enough to move me, until I stand among them, until they are as gentled hands in my mane. This day's searching over my head, finally just hanging. I rest here. At dusk, the wind calls the clouds. The sun loses her fierceness, and then the light is silver. Sideways across the mountain to me, thrumming sparks along my outline as I leave the shadows for the open again. And you, in a car passing me on the road alongside this field, stop and park. I raise my head to face you. You come to the fence line, struck and staring, and stand until this light from the mountain reaches from me to you. And I'll do two short ones. So, the thing about the animals, as Clint pointed out, I seem to be visited by animals a lot, and it has been that way since I was very little. I dreamt of horses and ravens and crows and hawks, and I write a lot about the natural world and a lot about the animals and in the voices of animals. And this poem was an actual dream that terrified me when I first had it, and then I sketched it, and then I painted it, and then I realized nothing to be afraid of when a part of you surfaces and greets you. Avatar. Last night, the raven returned, whip-stitching ribbons into my hair with her beak. She labored from my left shoulder, careful not to puncture my flesh with her claws, ceaseless croon from that thinnest of throats. I watched us in the mirror, my eyes like green, sanded glass, the storm sky before the lightning strike, my arms naked and empty as bared branches. Hardwood held me, feet rooted a hip width apart. Her iron eyes fixed me in the glass, her own feather crown rucked up around her head, wing tucked into the hollow between my jaw and shoulder bones. One pony braid now hooks from my left temple, tethered with a tail feather she plucked and positioned into the paintbrush edge of my gathered hair. She is me. Myself when I am real. And the last poem I will read because lightning. I was born in a lightning storm. And I have a Taos story about having this amazing sweat lodge held in my honor. And a very long sweat lodge because people I love, a few of you are here, came and gathered and prayed for me before I left Penn State after I'd had a terrible car accident. And I was told when I left the sweat lodge to stay off the mesa because my risk of being struck by lightning was quite high because of what had happened in the sweat lodge, right? Only in Taos. Make it up. And I kept dreaming about lightning before the sweat lodge. And then that afternoon, what did I do but go up on the mesa and damn near get my ass struck by lightning after I had been told, stay away from the lightning. And so lightning kept coming back to me, and I was getting ready to go in and do a prison reading. I did readings in the maximum security prisons in Pennsylvania for 9 years, working with violent felony offenders. And I was doing all these prison readings around the violence and the survival and the scorched earth, the book, and I was writing love poems. And it took me a long time to figure it out. That in the face of such oppression and such fear and such mystery and so much that is unknowable about our futures, the only thing that ever saves us is love. Love and beauty. But you have to love beauty for beauty to be able to save you. And so it comes down to love and holding the people who most need to be held is an act of service that is about love. Twin streaks of lightning. Come and be a god with me. We will be of lesser gods as our blood in the loving beats with the recollection of holy. We are the roadmap of each other. We are reflecting mirror, collecting pool. We are the praying ground. We are the prayer and the very answer itself. Thank you. So I do want to say there are resources available for women who are homeless in Taos, and we can get that information to anybody after the show who might need it. The men's shelter, it currently exists as freestanding. The women's shelter does not, but just because it is not freestanding does not mean that you are alone. We can provide you with shelter. Clint and his team can help you do that. Thank you very much. I love you.
Thank you. That's hero shit right there. Some of you may know that I'm a yoga teacher as well as the other things I do, and you might think that that gives me a form of enlightenment or something, or at least like that maybe I walk around with a clue about what's going on, but I don't. In fact, one of the things that I used to consciously do is pick enemies. And sometimes your enemies can be the closest people to you. So when I went about picking this particular enemy, I've got a huge ego. So I figured I better pick somebody who's really, going to be a challenge, right? So I've got to pick someone who's uber talented in every way. I have to pick someone who's Oxford educated. I have to pick someone who it's rumored was once a British spy. This is the kind of place my mind goes. What I found out is that Simon Bell is such an incredibly heartfelt and nice person that I could no longer keep him as an enemy. He had to be my friend. It's been said about him by my good friend Dora that he's always the smartest person in the room. And he is the person who every single reader, when they asked who was reading, they said, "Please do not make me follow Simon." And so that's why he's finishing this edition of Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics. Simon Bell.
Now look, I'm sorry about this. I'm afraid I'm going to have to lower the tone a bit and tell a little story about casual sex. And in the event that there's any connection between casual sex and Taos, God forbid, in that event, I promise you I will pursue that connection like a bloodhound. Casual sex is a much misunderstood phenomenon, and yet casual sex can change the destinies of nations and even the fate of the world itself. And let me give you an example. In the year 1507, Henry VIII, King of England, engaged in an afternoon bout of rumpy-pumpy with a prostitute. history does not grace us with her name, so for the sake of argument, I'm going to call her Madame Funbits. Now, Madame Funbits engaged in what Shakespeare would later call the beast with two backs that day. And in the course of this bout, Madame Funbits made Henry VIII a gift, and that gift was syphilis. Wind on a few years, Henry VIII is now married to his first wife, and the syphilis has gone to his brain. And what he decides to do is divorce his wife, because he's got syphilitic madness now. And against all advice and the explicit instructions of the Pope in Rome, he divorces his wife, and as a consequence, England leaves the Church of Rome. There follows the English Reformation and the foundation of the Church of England. Now, the Church of England turns out to be a rather more relaxed religion than the Roman Church, and there follows a glorious era of licentiousness and debauchery in England. And, of course, there are some people who don't like licentiousness and debauchery, and these people are called the Puritans. Now, the Puritans are disgusted eventually by the moral laxity in England, and they leave and settle in America. 400 years later, the descendants of these Puritans and many hundreds of thousands of other brave Americans come back to Europe and save Europe from itself in 2 world wars. The obvious conclusion to this is that thanks to Madame Funbits, we Europeans were delivered from Hitler. That is the effect of casual sex. What, you may be asking, has this got to do with Taos? Well, exactly 500 years after Henry VIII engaged in hiding the sausage with Madame Funbits, I came to Taos. Coincidence? Obviously, yes. But on that morning of October the 8th, 2007, I was walking up the Paseo del Norte, and it was a beautiful day. I'd been here for a few days, and towards me was coming a Native American. I was rooted to the spot, absolutely frozen with excitement, because for 46 years, all I'd ever wanted to do was to meet a Native American. And at last, this was happening. And the reason for this was because, from the age of 4 or 5, my aunt and uncle in Toronto, yes, Canadians, they'd been sending me gifts every birthday and Christmas from the Six Nations reservation outside Toronto. And I was fascinated by the Native American culture and the Native American human being. And at last, after 46 years, here was a Native American coming towards me. So I stopped, frozen, as I say, and when he was within hailing distance, I said, "Good morning!" And he stopped dead. And he didn't do anything, he didn't say anything, he just stared at me, and I thought maybe he's deaf or something. So I said, "Good morning," again, and he looked at me, and he said, "Are you fucking kidding, man? It's Columbus Day." So, as we all know, timing is everything, but that, unfortunately, is only in comedy situations. And having waited 46 years to wish a Native American good morning, it was kind of unfortunate to wish him good morning on the worst day in his people's history. Poor timing. Definitely. So I went down to the Pueblo later, and I apologized to him, and I said, "I'm so sorry, we don't have Columbus Day in England. I mean, for God's sake, the guy's Portuguese, isn't he?" So he said, "That's okay, come along, meet some friends." So we gathered around with some friends of his at the Pueblo, and we had a nice chat. And one of his friends said to me, one of these gentlemen at the Pueblo said, "So, do you have any Indian in you?" And this was a question I'd never been asked before. And without thinking, I said, yes, I do have some Indian in me, actually. And there was a long pause, completely impassive faces, and eventually one of them said, "How's that then?" And I said, "Well, my granny fucked a Cherokee." No reaction. I mean, these guys, they'd be the best poker players in the world. And at this point, I'm afraid we have to wind back a bit again to the year 1906. In 1906, my granny had just graduated from the Dick Van Dyke School of Chimney Sweeps for Girls. It was a short-lived venture because, of course, by the time you graduated, you were far too big to go up a chimney. And the school failed, and Granny was unemployed. And in that same year, in 1906, it was the last visit of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show to London. And that show had been visiting London since 1887. And in the first year it came to London, 2.5 million English people watched it. And since then, it had been touring Europe and England for 19 years. And, of course, Granny wanted to go and see it. So she got a ticket and she went to see it, and she loved it. And Granny being Granny, you know, wonderful woman, fun-loving, fun-giving, joie de vivre, she went round backstage and she started chatting to the cowboys and the Indians. And she fell into the company of a very charming young Cherokee man. And they became very close friends, and Granny took the Cherokee. History does not grace us with his name, so for the sake of argument, I'm going to call him Chief Thunderhorse. Granny took Chief Thunderhorse around London and showed him the sights. And they fell in love. Ladies and gentlemen, they fell in love. And eventually, of course, Chief Thunderhorse had to go back to his own people in America. And this was Granny's first and I think most enduring love. And she lost him. But in that year, 1906, a seed was planted in Granny. Now look, I realize that in a conversation about casual sex, that sentence, a seed was planted in Granny, could be interpreted in several ways. Now, we don't know what seed, or indeed seeds, were planted in Granny. But certainly one seed that was planted was a metaphorical seed, a memory seed, if you like. And this memory seed of this lovely Cherokee man kept Granny going through the First World War, when she lost all 5 of her brothers in the trenches. And it kept her going through the Second World War, when she was bombed out of her house 3 times by Hitler. And it kept her going when her husband, my grandfather, was taken away to a lunatic asylum, or Canada as we call it nowadays. And this seed lasted until, very, very vividly, until about 1947, according to my mother, and then the seed went dormant. Now, we go forward now another 30-odd years. And Granny, by this time, is 89, 90, something like that, and she's too old to live on her own in London. She was a Cockney, born in the sound of Bow Bells. And so she comes up to live with us in a little English country village. And one morning, after she's been living there for a bit, we get a call from the local police station. And they say, Granny's been arrested. And I say, what charges? And they say, drunk and disorderly. And this seems a bit unlikely, because she's about 91 by now. But anyway, I go down to the police station, and sure enough, there's Granny. But she's sitting in a very comfortable armchair, and she's surrounded by 5 very handsome, young, uniformed constables who are plying her with tea and cakes. And the commander of the station comes in, and he says, I'm so sorry, there's been a terrible mistake. And I said, it looks like it. And he said, I'm terribly sorry. We were asked to arrest a woman by the same name as your grandmother. And this other woman, turns out to be a 27-year-old prostitute in the nearby town. And I said, well, don't worry, Commander. Anybody could make that mistake. I'm going to take Granny home, and we won't say another word about it. So I go to Granny, and I say, Granny, we're going home. And she says, I'm not leaving. So I take her by the arm, and she screams. Suddenly, she goes, get off me, get off me. I don't know this man. They're trying to kidnap me. And I kind of reel back. And I go to see the commander, and I say, I'm sorry, we seem to have got a problem. Granny refuses to leave your police station. And my guess is she never wants to leave your police station ever again, because you've been so kind to her. So the commander says, don't you worry, I've got a plan. what we're going to do is we're going to arrest her again. Brilliant, I said. You've redeemed yourself, Commander. So they arrest her again. I think the charge was loitering in a police station, something like that, which was erased from the books later. And they arrest her, and Granny is actually over the moon, because for the second time that day she's been arrested, and she's got 4 more young, handsome men in uniform ushering her out of the police station into a squad car where they put the blue light on and they zoom her home. Granny hasn't had so many exciting, handsome young men in uniform around her since about 1918, and this was around 1976. Now, the point of this little interlude is that this incident changed Granny's life. And for the last 7 years of her life, it didn't change her character. She was still that wonderful, fun-loving, fun-giving, joie de vivre woman she'd always been. But what it changed was that for the last 7 years of her life, she only ever did one thing. And that one thing she did 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for 7 years. And it was organizing a bonfire and burning it at the bottom of the garden, a bonfire of garden waste, for 7 years every day. Now, clearly, we didn't have enough garden waste, so soon the whole village was bringing their garden waste into our garden so that Granny could keep burning. And by this time, I have to say, she turned into some kind of crazed industrial incinerator. And from the hill behind the village, every so often, all day, every day, on a clear day anyway, you could see little puffs of smoke coming up from Granny's bonfire. And I saw then that this seed had been regerminated. What Granny did for the last 7 years of her life was send smoke signals from a small English village in the countryside to Chief Thunderhorse. Apart from that, she had one other quirk. After lunch every day, she'd get a big balloon glass and fill it up with brandy. And she'd take it down, of course, to the bonfire. And she'd only drink half the glass of brandy. And she'd give the other half glass to her best friend in the last 7 years of her life. And her best friend lived just on the other side of the fence in the garden, and her best friend was in fact a horse. Now, I promise you, I witnessed this many times. She'd finish half the glass, and she'd hold the glass out, and the horse, of course, would be there waiting every day. And the horse would stick its big tongue in, and it would scoop out all the brandy and down it in one go. And I can tell you, this horse loved Granny. And Granny loved this horse. This horse, history does not grace us with its name, so I'm going to call this horse Silver. Silver the horse and Granny were best friends for the last 7 years of her life. Now, the point about this, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree, the point about this is that for the last 7 years of her life, Granny was sending up smoke signals from a small English village to Chief Thunderhorse. And the best friend she had was a horse. Now I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is this not prima facie evidence that my Granny fucked a Cherokee? Thank you.
That's why nobody would follow him. I would just want to thank you guys again for coming out. We do live in a social media-laden world these days, so tceh.org is the Taos Coalition to End Homelessness's website, and we also have a Facebook page, the Taos Men's Shelter. Misfits, Malcontents, and Mystics also has a Facebook page. If you go to all of these, like them, whatever, leave a comment, support us in any way you can. We love you all. Thank you.